Okay. It is now 1:03. I think that is a good time for us to start. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to come join us in our webinar. We are the Low Carbon Contracts Company, and this webinar will be covering the contracts for different scheme. Where are we now and where might we go? Our main presenters today are Andrew Venarva and Adam Williams, as seen. And could we go to the next slide, please? So my name is Alex. I'm with the comms team at LCCC, and let's just go through some quick logistics first before we start. This meeting is recorded, and we will be circulating this webinar after the event. And we ask all participants to keep themselves on mute and cameras off, but this is this function of MS Teams anyway. And we welcome questions throughout. We have the Q&A panel open on MS Teams, and we will be covering them at the end. This webinar should last for about 60 minutes, and we aim to finish with 20 minutes to spare to tackle some of the questions. So moving on. This is the rough agenda for the webinar. We'll first be looking at an overview of LCCC's role, the CfD, ERA 6, involving the CfDs, and then we'll be moving on to new schemes, and then the Q&A. So if I could just hand off to Andrew now.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everyone. My name's Andrew Venarva. I'm a lead contract manager within the electricity CfD team, so it's part of the wider scheme delivery team. And I'll be taking you through the CfD Where Are We Now? Next slide, please, Alex. So as the Low Carbon Contracts Company, or LCCC as we abbreviate it to, what are we here for? What are we here to do? So our mission, and as it says on the screen, is to shape and implement schemes. So we do this with a variety of methods. So you've got the operational contract management and relationship management, which is what my team, the electricity CfD team, do. So we have circa 239 renewable CfDs that have been awarded. So we take them through the initial stage of signing their CfD through to their milestones, and then when they become operational and start generating to receive their CfD payments. The second limb is the advisory service that we do. So it's looking at the new schemes that are coming up, working with counterparties in the government and in industry to essentially replicate the gold standard, which you'll see is mentioned later on that the CfD is. Our vision is very simple: to accelerate the delivery of net zero. Now you'll see that we've got some guiding principles at the bottom, which is behind everything that we do. So to simply put it, to accelerate the net zero is one of the focal points of everything that we do at LCCC. To maintain investor confidence is, very, very important. You'll see on the next slide how much investment has been invested into the industry thus far. And to create that confidence with investors, will hopefully see investment grow in the renewable industry. And the CfD is a perfect mechanism for that, because it provides stabilization in the prices, which we can get onto a little bit later on in the slides. Next slide, please, Alex. So kind of the CfD, what's been delivered so far? As I mentioned, there's 239 renewable CfDs. 238 of those are in the renewable electricity space. So the area that I look after, which there are 12 technologies part of. And of those 12 technologies, tidal and geothermal made an appearance in allocation round 5. In allocation round 4, there was a huge uptake in solar CfDs, and we can get onto that a little bit later. So when we're looking at investment, kind of circa at the moment, there's 61.4 billion has been invested into low carbon projects, and it's about maintaining that investor confidence. And I know I keep saying it, but it's one of the guiding principles that we have. The more confidence that investors have, the more they will invest into renewable projects, and the faster we can get to meeting those net zero goals. We've got the the first hydrogen allocation round, or HAR1, projects coming through the pipeline. So when these are projects are all online and generating, we anticipate providing roughly around 30% of the energy demand that's currently forecasted. Obviously, with the new allocation rounds that come out, so allocation round 6 and 7, 8, that will increase, but also our energy demand may also increase along with it. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. Next slide, please. So what do we do? What is our role today? So in 2014, the low carbon contracts company were designated as the counterparty to the electricity CfD scheme. It's really important to note that these are private law contracts. So they are contracts between LCCC and the generator. And the reason why that's important is that they're supported by the legal provisions and protections that are in many private law contracts. So force majeure change is anything to do with extension of times, qualifying changes in law. So it's really important that that's highlighted, because it does provide protections for the generators if the unforeseen should happen. I did mention earlier that the CfD has been quoted as the gold standard by the investor community, which I think is really important, and it's something that people do gravitate to. Adam will come on to later. We've advised other industries and other governments on how the CfD scheme works, which is very important. As I mentioned earlier, new technologies are often coming through allocation rounds, and in allocation round 5, we saw the addition of tidal and geothermal CFDs, which is really exciting, and it's great to see new generating technologies thriving and getting CFDs. We're also the settlement body for. Sorry, one moment. We're also the settlement body for the capacity market, and for those that aren't aware, the capacity market essentially is providing security of our electricity supply, so ensuring that we can meet the electricity demand that is out there. In circa 2016, we were also designated as the counterparty to the Hinkley Point C CFD, which is managed in our new schemes and bespoke team. And then at the back end of last year, we were designated the counterparty for the first coming hydrogen production contracts. So they're currently making their way through the pipeline, and we hope to have them in kind of later this year, which is really exciting. What we're working towards, what's our aim? And I mentioned in the first slide that part of what we do is help implement and shape. So this is our advisory services provided by, again, our new schemes and bespoke team, to look at things like the industrial carbon capture and CCUS, energy from waste, CCUS, the dispatchable power agreements, and the settlement body for the NRAP. So our advisory service, as I mentioned, works with our counterparties in the government, works with industry leaders to develop these schemes right from inception all the way through to contract production, and then their subsequent allocation rounds. It's important that we maintain those relationships within industry and with the government to help usher in new schemes that will help essentially get us to delivering net zero as soon as possible. The CfD itself has a 15-year contract span from the time that the CfD has started, and that provides a revenue stability for that entirety of that contract via the strike price, which I will come on into the next slides. Next slide, please, Alex. So the roles and responsibilities, how does it work? So the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, or DESNZ, is responsible for setting out the policy, setting out the guidelines for the allocation rounds, and setting out the auction parameters. So they do that via consultation with us and other industry bodies to make sure that what we want to achieve at the allocation rounds is actually achieved. The responsibility then passes on to National Grid ESO, and they're actually responsible for running the allocation process. They are responsible for the auction as well, so they provide the first round reviews, and anyone that's been through an allocation round will be familiar when you pass that first one or tier one review. They communicate with us throughout the entirety of the process, so we work very hand in hand with them. So it helps with our planning process as well, and we've got very good working relationship with our counterparties at the National Grid. Once the allocation round, essentially, and the auction has closed, and generators have been awarded contracts of difference, the responsibility then passes over to the low carbon contracts company. And as I mentioned before, we take them through a contract signature to onboarding the contracts, building those working relationships with them, which is very important, all the way through their milestones. And the CSD has different milestones that the generator has to achieve to be able to get to that end stage where they are generating and they're receiving difference payments. We also continue to liaise with our colleagues at DESNZ on anything that comes through from the generators. We pride ourselves on a relationship with the generators, and when they share with us things that could improve the scheme, or any blockers or complications or complexities that they come across, we feed that back to our colleagues at DESNZ, and it helps continuously evolve the allocation rounds. And then the end goal is to be online, to be generating to and receiving the difference payments. And then through to the 15-year lifespan of the contract. We've not yet got there in any of the CFDs that we have, but it will be about the end of the CFD, end of the terms, and the decommissioning itself. Next slide, please, Alex. So a little bit more about the CFD regime itself. Next scheme, Alex. So what was the contracts are different actually designed to do? So through the strike price, as I've mentioned, and I'll come on to a little bit later, it's to provide that price stabilization, and also kind of increase the investor confidence in the scheme. So via the strike price, a project will receive a guaranteed amount for the energy that they generate, regardless of what the reference price is doing. The CFD does have this is why it's called the difference. So depending on where the reference price is with the strike price, depends on the whether the scheme is paying out to generators or whether the generators are paying back into the scheme. And I can come on to that in a little bit later. The first CFD was signed. Sorry, one slide back, please. Thank you. The scheme saw its first CFD signed in 2015. And as I said, its intention is to facilitate that private investment into low carbon, and we do that via de-risking the investment and that price stabilization that I mentioned. You see there's an interesting fact on the screen, which is very encouraging. The scheme actually works. Everyone that we've spoken to thinks that the CFD is a great mechanism, is a great scheme out there, and it's a testament that other countries, other governments have sought our advice in potentially implementing a CFD-like scheme in their area of the world, which is great to hear. As I mentioned previously, the current CfD portfolio has 12 technologies, which you will see in the screen. As I mentioned, tidal, geothermal, that was the first time that we saw those in the allocation round 5. So we hope in allocation round 6, we will see more of that technology. And then in future allocation rounds, see newer technologies emerging into the market, which is a really exciting space to be into. Next slide, please, Alex. So on the screen is just some high-level stats of the technologies within the CfD portfolio. In allocation round 4, solar projects saw a big resurgence. And just some interesting facts for you, that though the the solar CFDs form roughly around 40% of the actual CFDs, that only provide 14% of the generating capacity. Same with offshore wind. They account for around 19% of the CFD contracts, with roughly around 10% of the generation expected. Obviously, as the allocation rounds grow, we will see these more established technologies more frequently and be awarded CFDs. So these numbers on the screen will grow, but this is what they were after the allocation round 5, which was awarded in September 2023. Next slide, please, Alex. So offshore wind, as you can see on the screen there are some big projects with Hornsea 2, the world's largest operational wind farm at 1.3 gigawatts. So you can see that these are huge projects, and just some interesting stats. So for offshore wind, they account for roughly around 20% of the CFDs, but are responsible for a whopping 65% of the expected generation, which, when compared to the statistics that I share for solar, you can see that it's not the number of projects, but it's actually the generation that they produce. And it's some great work by our team to get Hornsea 1 and Hornsea 2 and Hornsea 3, coming through the pipeline. Some of them are generating, some of them are soon to be generating. And the big Dogger Bank project, which I'm not sure if people are available sure of, but definitely worth checking out. There are some exciting things happening in the offshore wind space. We've got one onshore wind, floating offshore wind project that came through in allocation round 4. Some exciting technology. I attended a working group with the designers of the floating offshore wind project, and it's actually really exciting to see how they've taken established technologies, put a little bit of a twist on it to introduce a new technology, which is really great to see in the industry, and it's continuously grown, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, the strike price, what does it do? What's its purpose, and how does it actually work in real life? So in each allocation round, there is a strike price set for each technology. That strike price is the guaranteed revenue stream of for the 15-year contract that the generators will receive per megawatt hour of electricity generated. If the reference price is below the strike price, then the CfD scheme tops up the difference to get the generators to that strike price. So it's that guarantee no matter what the reference price is doing. If the reference price is above the strike price, that's the circumstances where the generators pay back into the scheme. Again, the difference, and that we use that to help the consumer and to lower energy bills. That's the strike price in a very simplistic term. The reference prices, whether it's the intermittent market reference price or the baseload market reference price, they're calculated using different variable factors. They're done by our energy analytics team. And there is information available on the LCCC website if you are interested about that. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Adam, who's going to take us through to the rest of the slides.
Good. Okay. Afternoon, everyone. I'm actually speaking through Andrew's microphone, so hoping everyone can hear me okay. If not, Alex, I'm hoping your message to say, okay, I had a thumbs up. Fantastic. Good. So my name's Adam Williams. I'm head of policy, regulation and business development at LCCC. It's quite a mouthful. And effectively that manages two sort of separate teams. So the policy and regulation side, I'll actually, Dino, it's a slide before, if that's all right. The policy and regulation side, we are very much a kind of trusted advisors to government. So we offer this kind of credible, impartial advice from the knowledge we acquire from speaking to developers. So we're very much that kind of conduit and bridge between industry, what's good, what's not going so good with the scheme, and advising government to help shape that policy getting better. So that's for the CfD, the capacity market. And the other part of my role is the business development side. So that's working with, again, with different departments within government to shape the new schemes, which I'll come on to later. But there's lots of hydrogen schemes going on at the moment, and we're very much developing those schemes, learning from what we know, what works, what doesn't work, and making sure that we continue to provide a really good environment to invest. So just following on from what Andrew was saying about the scheme, so the CfD scheme is funded by something called the Supplier Obligation Levy, and one of our biggest roles is to manage those payments. So as Andrew said, if the electricity price is below the strike price, generators topped up, and likewise if the electricity price is higher than the strike price, generators paid back. That's our remit to manage those payments, and that's through the Supply Obligation Levy. And I suppose the key point on this slide is that box. So LCCC must determine payments and notify every active electricity supplier roughly 3 months ahead of the quarter. So we've got quite an extensive analytics team who do an awful lot of forecasting to make sure that those levies, which go on to suppliers, go on to everyone's household and to businesses, are as accurate as they can be. And that's part of our remit, is to make sure that we're doing this accurately. We are a non-profit organisation, so we get paid for our kind of operational costs, but we don't make a profit from what we do. Good. Next slide, please, Dina. Right, so now I'm going to talk about AR6, which is very current at the moment. We're currently going through the kind of allocation round, and a bit about the budget, the administrative strike prices, and then the future of the CfD. Again, next slide, please, Dina. Good. Right. So at the back end of last year, DESNZ published the parameters for the allocation round 6 auction. So by the nature of 6, there's been 5 previous allocation rounds, and there was 3 main changes that were applied to this auction. So the first being the pot structure. So government have moved to having a 3-pot structure. So there's a pot 1 for more established technologies, a pot 2 for what they class as emerging technologies, and for this year they've created a specific pot for offshore wind. So this goes back to what was seen in allocation round 4. Offshore wind had its own pot. You may well know in allocation round 5 that didn't happen. It wasn't hugely successful for offshore wind. So the government, credit to them, have listened to that, and they've created this 3rd pot specifically dedicated to offshore wind. The second change is about the delivery years. So the delivery years for the more established technologies are slightly earlier than the delivery years for the emerging technologies and offshore wind. That's due to the thought that more established technologies generally don't have as many complications and can get onto the grid faster. And then the third key difference, I suppose, and something to really bang the drum about, is the administrative strike prices. So for those who on the call who maybe aren't aware, the administrative strike price is the cap that each technology can bid into the auction. So it's absolutely not what those technologies will walk away with, but it's a limit to what they can bid. And as you see from the figures, generally, pot 1 established technologies have got lower caps than the newer technologies in pot 2 and offshore wind in pot 3. Those administrative strike prices have seen a significant uplift from the previous allocation round. A lot of the feedback the government had was, given the macroeconomic circumstances that have happened, those ASPs need to be more reflective of current costs. It's also worth noting those ASPs are all in 2012 prices, day zero, the day the world began in terms of CfD. So those prices in today's money will be quite significantly higher. So taking offshore wind, for instance, it's probably around about £100 in today's money, albeit it's £73 in 2012 prices. Good. Next slide, please, Dina. Okay, so the budget for this allocation round was announced in March or April this year. As I mentioned, we're currently going through this allocation round. It's administered by the National Grid ESO delivery body, following which once it's the contracts are allocated and of course come across to CCC to manage. But to talk you through the kind of different pots, so there's 3 pots and each of those pots has a budget allocated to it. So albeit the total budget is just over £1 billion, that's split between the 3 pots, and those pots are effectively a completely separate auction. So they're kind of technology agnostic for everything that is in a pot, and all the technologies within a same pot compete for that same budget, but they don't compete against the other pots. So for instance, offshore wind is not competing against floating offshore wind. It's got a dedicated budget that offshore wind projects will be competing against. It's also worth noting, albeit this budget doesn't seem like a significant amount of money, it's not the total funds that can be allocated to a project. It's what the budget impact will be. So it's a difference between the market reference price and the strike price. So the funds can actually facilitate an awful lot of projects coming online, as opposed to that being the total amount that can be allocated to projects. So a few nuances, I suppose, to talk about in this auction. Budgetary maximum. So in the pot 1 was a budgetary maximum for onshore wind, solar, and remote island wind. Effectively, that's the only mechanism through which, in the allocation framework, which are the kind of guidelines for the CfDs, each of those technologies can have a separate clearing price. So if those budgetary maximums weren't applied, everything in the pot would have the same clearing price. That doesn't happen because DESNZ rather, have applied a budgetary maximum to those technologies. There is a ring-fence budget in that middle pot for tidal stream. So that means £10 million, provided technologies for tidal stream bid into the auction, will be guaranteed to be dedicated to that technology. Again, another budgetary maximum for geothermal, and a ring-fenced budgetary maximum for permitted reductions, which is a kind of an ability for technologies or projects to reduce their capacity by up to 25%. What we've experienced is some of those projects are now bidding into the AR6 auction, and again, there's by having that budgetary maximum, it means there's a separate strike price for those permitted reduction projects and new offshore wind projects. Good. Next slide, please, Dina. And then again. Good. Right. This is the one I told you I put some animations in, so you might have to click again, please. Right. Fab. Yeah, just leave them all up. I'd obviously put those animations in the wrong way around, which noted. So one of the main changes coming up. So this section is about what might the future of the CfD look like. Something we know is going to be allocated for allocation round 7, which is, I suppose, coming on very fast, is something called the Sustainable Industry Reward. It used to be known as non-price factors. And this is just applicable to offshore wind and floating offshore wind. And I suppose, full disclosure, until I worked at CCC, I was working for a very large offshore wind developer. And in the industry, there was a general consensus that we would like to bring jobs and industry to GB. The way economics work, that would mean the project is probably uncompetitive, and that might, or probably would mean, you were unsuccessful in the auctions. And so there was no incentive to bring jobs to GB. In fact, you're more likely to be penalised through having higher costs. So industry generally would welcome any incentive, provided it was across the board, to, as I said, to incentivize those jobs to come to the UK. And this is being done through various jurisdictions around the world. The USA is probably the biggest example, having the Inflation Reduction Act. Lots of the parameters to build an offshore wind farm in the US are very reliant upon creating US jobs for specific states. So that's kind of the context around where the SIRs are coming from. And there's a few nuances which I thought would be good to talk through. So there's two aspects to it. There's minimum standards, and this is required for every generator that wishes to participate in the AL7 auction. They are still to be determined by DESNZ, and they will be set in something which is called the SIR allocation framework. It's likely to be a pound per gigawatt investment criteria. As I said, this will be the first kind of hurdle for any projects that wish to participate in the AL7 auction for offshore wind and floating offshore wind. If you don't meet this minimum criteria, you are not able to participate in the auction. Submission is likely to be about 7 or 8 months before the allocation round. That's subject to kind of what's a new government is kind of gets things established, and people have got their heads around kind of what's going on with the CfD, but the plan is to have it 7 or 8 months before the allocation round. And under delivery of these minimum standards, so if you are successful in delivering getting through the kind of minimum standards hurdle, you go into the allocation round, you're successful, under delivery of those minimum standards results in penalties. And then the second aspect to SIRs is a commitments auction. This is voluntary. So the first aspect is compulsory to participate in the auction. The second one is voluntary, and it will happen about 4 months before the allocation round. These are on top of the minimum standards, and essentially there'll be a number of criteria that a proposal will be judged upon. At the moment, it's saying quality is 60% and cost is 40% in the weighting. Again, needs to be determined in the SIR allocation framework, and there'll be a budget set by DESNZ to support with these sustainable industry reward commitments. And effectively, the budget is drawn down upon until it's fully used up. And as I said, it's a top-up payment for delivering some of these additional criteria, although it's not compulsory for entering into the allocation auction. This SIR actually became law in May this year. There should be a budget announcement for the SIRs in autumn time, let's say, pending new government getting up to speed with the current ongoings. And next slide then, please, Dina. So this was to sort of illustrate a bit of the timeline. So initially with the consultation in November last year, there was a number of proposals that were considered to be included within the SIR framework. Deprived areas, supporting SMEs, carbon intensity and supply chain sustainability. These have been kind of streamlined by DESNZ. So they published the response in March this year, and the criteria are now shortening supply chains in deprived areas and investment in more sustainable supply chains anywhere in the world. These criteria, all combination of both, these criteria are meant to be streamlined and refined further in the SIR allocation framework, which is imminently due to be published. Next slide, please. Right, so evolving the CfD, there's a number of changes. It's a really interesting time to be working in the energy industry, particularly in LCCC. There's a lot going on, and we're kind of at the heart of shaping this. But some of the key areas that could potentially impact the CfD going forward. So REMA, a review of electricity market arrangements. This has been kind of the bane of my life or my team's life for the past 3 months, responding to the consultation. And its ambition is to effectively the electricity market has kind of become quite disparate. It's been allowed to evolve in kind of different areas, and REMA aims to kind of pull all that, have a holistic view of what's going on, and bring things into a more kind of streamlined arrangement. So there's a consultation that's closed a few months ago, and DESNZ are due to publish their response, I imagine later this year, but I'm told there's an awful lot of responses and there's quite a lot of detail within those. But some of the things which are considered in there, there's locational pricing, there's deemed CfDs. Again, it could have quite a profound impact on the regime, CfD regime itself, but it's to be determined where DESNZ will land on those different areas. Review of meeting arrangement. So this was consulted on in their AR7 consultation, again, earlier this year, and DESNZ are due to publish a response in the autumn to this. So this is essentially a lot of feedback we get from developers is the current regulatory regime doesn't lend itself to co-location. So having a wind farm with battery storage or wind farm with a hydrogen plant, and this is meant to be tackled within that consultation, and again could have quite a really positive impact, I think, on a lot of projects. Pot structures, I mentioned before that we've moved to a 3-pot structure for AR6. This is something which is constantly being assessed. We speak to industry, DESNZ speak to industry, they try and take on board the comments. There's obviously a balance between cost for consumers and trying to reach net zero, which needs to be considered, but I suppose in there to say it is something which DESNZ are cognizant of, we're cognizant of, and we do listen to what industry tell us. CfD indexation, again, this was consulted on in the AR7 consultation earlier this year, looking at is there a better way to adjust the CfD payments with inflation, and whether that would help protect projects from some of the issues that we're seeing in kind of some of the AR4 projects specifically have struggled to get online. Repowering, so again, from the AR7 consultation, that's the last one from that, is specific for onshore wind. And the statement that she said, decommissioning and recommissioning of the existing site, which is incurring similarly high upfront capital costs that are of a new build. So looking at, as some of these assets come to the end of their CfD life, what regulation or what facilities can be in place to support new projects coming up forward. Strengthening of the non-delivery incentive. So this is where I don't think anyone wants to see budgets for CfD allocation rounds being used up for projects that don't actually come to fruition. So we're sort of assessing, is the current regulation strong enough to make sure that doesn't happen except in extreme circumstances, or does it need to be tightened up to sort of make sure that any money allocated in those budgets and those auction rounds comes through to deliver projects to support net zero. And then macroeconomic factors, ensuring the CfD continues to deliver against wider international challenges. And I suppose this is similar to what Andrew mentioned earlier, and a bit of a plug for LCCC. It's something we are often doing, is talking to our counterparties all over the world and looking at what is best practice, what are other countries doing. We sort of have an undefined remit to make sure that the GB remains the best place to invest in renewable projects in the world. And so we're looking at, there's a lot of competition now from other countries, and making sure that we continue to maintain one of the top spots, if not the top spots, to put your money in. Good. Next slide, please, Dina. Okay, so I think this is taking me to the end of my slot. So new schemes. We are involved in a large number of different schemes supporting the government. So if you can click to the next slide, please. Good. So this is a list of kind of extensive list of everything we're involved in. So I'm not going to talk through the whole list, but to pull up a few kind of critical ones, particularly in that box on the left, preparing and implementing. This is a big part of my role in the business development side. There's various hydrogen production, ICC, dispatchable power agreements, an awful lot of things we're working on. Advising, again, a long list of hydrogen schemes that are being looked at, and then other opportunities. These are maybe a bit more nascent, a bit more further afield, but it's something we are heavily involved in with DESNZ and different organisation and body groups and industry. So very much at the heart of industry, very much at the kind of the pinnacle of shaping these new technologies and making sure we've got the right regulatory environment to get them off the ground. Great. That was my last slide. Good. Alex, are you jumping in?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So thank you, Adam and Andrew, and we're going to be starting our Q&A now. Please forward any of the questions to the Q&A panel on the top that you can see as part of MS Teams. I do know that there is a question that was caught in the chat. Some of them we might not be able to answer right away because we need to double check with our teams across the business. So any questions that are left unanswered, don't worry, we will get back to you in the via private email. So let me just give a second to see if we get any more questions coming in. Don't have any more coming in right now. I guess Andrew and Adam were just very thorough.
So there's one that's been asked, is wave energy likely to be ring-fenced in future CfD rounds? Good question. It's, as I mentioned, it's something every year we've moved to annual allocation rounds, and it does make it quite a quick turnaround, albeit a year seems like a long time by the time things have to go through kind of assessment by DESNZ analysts, approved by the Secretary of State. It can, a year is very tight. Government are constantly speaking to industry about where would be the right areas to kind of support, and wave could potentially be one of those areas, but at the same time it might be surpassed by other technologies. So I've winged that one a bit, but I think it's very difficult to say, and I think it depends on kind of the economic and environmental scenario at the time. A number of changes are currently being consulted on in AR7 consultation, and so, for instance, collocation and sub-metering. And the question is, please can LCCC clarify the governance process approach when enabling any approved reforms to be retroactive available for historic CfD agreements? So something we pride ourselves on at LCCC, and something our establishment, we're an arm's length government body. So although DESNZ are our shareholder, we are an independent company. And one of the strengths of that is if you have a contract with LCCC, it is it cannot be interfered with or tampered with by whoever's in charge in the government. And that's something which really we hear from investors all the time, is one of the great strengths of the CfD regime. What that also means is that it's not necessarily, when you have terms for a project, it's not necessarily that new changes will be retroactively applied to the existing contracts. And it's something whereby absolutely we speak to DESNZ all the time, and if there is a real ambition, or we think it will be beneficial to roll things out across the board, it's something we very much look at being able to do. So for the examples in the question, co-location, for instance, there's obvious benefits there to be able to apply that retroactively. So it's something I'm sure DESNZ are considering.
Okay, let's just give Andrew and Adam some time to read through. We had quite a few questions just come in.
Oh yeah, good. Okay, good. So a couple more questions have gone through. I'll read them out just so everyone is aware what they are. So someone's put, I'm aware that some global auctions have failed for, says CfDs, but I guess renewable incentive schemes. And why is that? There's a number of reasons, and I don't think there's one specific answer that you can generalize for why different auctions have failed. I would say a couple of the main parameters are prices being set too low. So often these auctions will have a cap on what can be bid, and that cap has been set low in a number of jurisdictions. I think a couple of years ago there was quite, I would like to say unique, hopefully unique macroeconomic circumstances that meant a number of projects weren't necessarily able to deliver for what those caps were. And again, if you take the US as an example, a number of projects there, you could argue it hasn't necessarily been successful because they had these fixed prices, and a lot of the projects have pulled out of that. And some of the other auctions that haven't necessarily gone to plan, I would say is too stringent criteria applied to the auction. So be that some of the non-price factors, or as I said, those prices being set too low. And it's something I'm sure DESNers are cognizant of. It's something my team, the policy guys, look into to have an understanding of what actually went wrong in a specific auction and try and make sure that that isn't going to be happening here. And another question was, how does the budget get determined? So the budget for each pot is determined. That's wholly determined by DESNers. I should state. And DESNers have a number of analysts, a large team of us actually, who look at the number of projects that they think will be going into an auction, what their prices might be, and they try and the ambition is to have a competitive tension within each pot. So not setting the budget large enough so every project will get in. As I mentioned earlier, there's the drive for net zero, but there's having the best cost for consumers as well, and it's reaching that balance. So DESNers analysts look at what projects they think will be going to the auction and then work out what the budget would be to allow a certain percentage of those projects to be successful whilst maintaining that competitive tension. So it's I wouldn't say a dark art, but it's not so clear cut as to say these are what's applied and this is what the budget will be based on that. It's also signed off by the Secretary of State as well, so there is some politics often involved in what that budget could be too. Good. There's some more questions.
Okay.
Okay, right. So there is another question. With the new government's plan to achieve decarbonisation by 2030, do you envisage higher budgets in future allocation rounds to match its ambition? Yes, I would say I do think there will be higher budgets in future to accommodate that, which I think would have happened regardless of change in government. I think to reach net zero, we need a lot more capacity on board. Most people seem cognizant of that, so I would have envisaged higher budgets going forward to accommodate that. I think that's it for questions. Alex?
Okay. Thank you, Adam and Andrew, for helping answer those questions. So like I've noted before, we might not have caught everything, and we will reach out to you if we haven't been able to answer your questions. If you have any further questions, if you want to get in contact with us, please do. Just drop us a query at our info@inbox. Andrew and Adam have also very kindly left their emails if you want to reach out to them to discuss further. But that's about it. So again, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Andrew and Adam for presenting. We will be again recording this webinar and circulating it in case you'd like to take a look at it again. But yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.